My name is David Crow, and I'm one of the pastors here at Grace Bible Church in Fairburn, and also on the web at gracebible.faith. That is gracebible.faith. And here at Grace Bible Church, we just finished a long study of the book of James, and in our Sunday School hour are advancing through a study of Old Testament survey. Now, between our study of the book of James and our forthcoming study of the book of Philippians, we're engaging in a series of special messages. And during this time, Pastor Matt Neal is also giving some messages from the book of Galatians. And this week we'll be hearing from Pastor Matt as he advances in his work through the book of Galatians and gives special attention this week to Paul's articulation of the gospel within the book, as the integrity of the gospel is at stake for those whom Paul is writing to in this letter. This message will build on one that Pastor Matt recently taught, in which he opened our time with a review of a necessary foundation for the letter before advancing into a consideration of its tone so as to help us understand how we should read and understand the book. So with this, we were first reminded of what Paul states in chapter 5, verse 2, where he expresses that Christ is of no benefit to those who pursue circumcision. Now that's quite a lofty charge. And to help us understand this, Pastor Matt drew out the comparison that we see in the book of Hebrews, where Jewish Christians were warned about the consequences of returning to Judaism. Now here, in the book of Galatians, we have the Gentile counterpart to this danger, namely Gentiles turning from Christianity to Judaism, or seeing a need to assimilate Christianity into Judaism. The most overt expression of this being the taking of the requirement of circumcision. He then went on to explain that what may seem like a peculiar tension to us was quite challenging for these early believers, reminding us that for thousands of years, the process prescribed by God was that a proselyte, or non-Jewish persons putting their faith in God, were required to be circumcised and follow the law. So, this was a substantial shift of expectations and requirements, and would have provoked a lot of questions, and perhaps some of them would have included, who was Paul to change what God had established and required of his believing community for so long? Or perhaps, what would such a change communicate about the law? Are we to conclude that the law has somehow failed? Or what is the believing community to be governed by now that we are not under the law? These are good questions, and ones that really need to be wrestled through and that we anticipate seeing being resolved as we continue in our study of the book of Galatians. However, we already have the answer to the first question, and that's found in Ephesians chapter 3, where Paul explains the nature of the mystery of the church, which is a unified body of Jews and Gentiles. Now, Pastor Matt, following the examination or considering these questions and the resolution that we have in Ephesians chapter 3, went on to direct our attention to how the tone of the book impacts our reading and understanding of it as well. A point he established by giving the example of Lamentations and Song of Solomon, two books that clearly have a tone to them and whose content is really misrepresented without an appreciation of such matters as their tone. So Lamentations obviously has a somber weightiness and a grief to it, while Song of Solomon has a spirited passion to it. So also Galatians has a defining tone to it as well. And it's one of great concern, a righteous anxiety, a pastoral burden for the soul of its readers. A matter that was developed from a number of passages, as we looked at in the message, or Pastor Matt examined for us, but that really can be well represented by considering two passages in particular, namely how Paul opens and closes his letter. So he opens the letter with a clear sense of urgency, and that seems to all but immediately compel him to begin addressing his concerns and the weightiness of their dangers. And then notice how he closes the book. He effectively takes up the pen, as it were, and restates a concise treatment of the whole of his argument. And with this, summarizes in chapter 6, verses 11 through 18, the nature of the totality of what he's covered in a very concise fashion to express the urgency and the weight of the matter. And that kind of weighty urgency by Paul ought to press us to more properly appreciate the unique necessity of this letter. He feared for the souls of those whom he labored for and so desperately wanted to see finish well. A matter in jeopardy if they sought to take on circumcision and the demands of the law in an effort to please God. So I think it's quite plain why this week Pastor Matt will be taking on what we think is what we know to be a necessary examination of the gospel as it's articulated by Paul in the book of Galatians.